Good morning, Impact family. It's just a great joy for me to be able to greet you today from my home here in Port Elizabeth, and just so privileged to be able to be asked by the leadership at Impact, especially Pastor Arnold, to be able to share the Word of God with you this morning. I'm really aware of the refining times that you as a congregation have been going through in the last while. It's been a long pull since you last were able to meet together, and I know that there's excitement building about the opportunity to gather together later in the year, and Shelley and I are hoping to be able to join you for that celebration. But as a congregation also, you've been through the mill in the last while with a number of people passing away, lots of challenges, and the effects of the separation as a congregation beginning to be felt by all of you. And it's been a refining process, I believe. There's so little that is familiar to you right now as a congregation, or even close to what you experienced or what you had prior to the outbreak of COVID or the lockdown and so forth. Equally, I've been really touched by and deeply affected by the numerous instances which people have shared with us in the last little while where their faith and their experience seem to clash. What they're believing and what they're sensing and what they're experiencing seems to have this huge gap between them. There are some very serious questions that are being asked, and it would be remiss of me to say that we can come up with simple answers or glib answers or the kind of thing that we might have just very easily shared with people by way of a solution in the past to these serious questions. They just don't seem to cut it any longer. They really don't seem to cut it any longer. I'm not speaking this morning about unbelief, because unbelief is a place that you reach where you stop believing or you refuse to believe in something. And in our case, stop believing or refuse to believe in the goodness of God or who he is or that he's available or that he's in control. But I want to speak this morning a little bit around the concept of doubt, where we begin, because of our experiences, to waver in our opinions on things and exactly what we are founded on and what we believe. Doubt. It's clear to me as I read the beginning of the letter to James that doubt and doubting the things that we have always held fast to about our belief in God and his nature and so forth. It's not just something which we go through in our generation because of COVID. It's something which is addressed in the Word of God as well. And in James writes, and he says to the people that he's writing to, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. And you do this because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him." And this is the main thing. "But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all he does." As I said, doubt and kind of rechecking what we believe and so forth is not something which is only occasioned because we're not familiar with the turf that we're living in and we're not being able to gather and so forth. It's something which the Bible takes very seriously and addresses. And every generation goes through this at some point or another. It's just heightened for us right now in what we're going through. We don't even have to have really huge gaps between what we think we believe or what we confess and what we experience for doubt to set in. It doesn't have to be major things. Sometimes it can be very simple. And I'm encouraged because in Matthew 28 and verse 17, straight after the resurrection, when the 11 disciples confront the risen Lord Jesus, even in that situation where Jesus is right in front of them, he's the risen Lord, yet some of those disciples still doubted in spite of him standing in front of them. They still doubted that it was him and the reality of his presence. Now, it doesn't get much easier to believe in the risen Jesus when he's standing right in front of you. But if you can still be in that position and doubt, it does give me some consolation for what we are facing in these days and the kind of challenges that we're up against. Doubt all too often sets in when God's answers to me appear either to be delayed or different to what I've asked for or what I've expected. That seems to me to be the ground of where doubt begins to settle. When I've been asking and asking and asking and asking and trusting God and believing God for something and for an answer, and it just never seems to happen. It gets delayed and delayed and delayed. That's the one ground of it. Or the other one is when God does answer, but he does it in a different way to what I was anticipating, expecting, or wanting. And I kind of judge the goodness of God on the basis of what he does deliver to me or doesn't deliver to me, as it may be. It can happen collectively as well when we cannot see what we believe God for working out in the natural. As a church, you've been disconnected, and I know that there's been a real desire for a meeting place and things like that, and that seems to have been delayed or not happening. And as a collective, not just as individuals, we can equally get to the place where our sense of just questioning can settle in at an even greater level because we're all feeling the same kind of way. How do we deal with this? How do we come to terms with shifting sands for us? And it's not like we've given up on God, but maybe we're just struggling a little to wrap our heads around what our reality is versus what we have said we believe. The theologian Alistair McGrath has helped me to understand a couple of things around doubt. And he says that very often you can reduce our experience of doubt to two reasons. Number one, he says, we can reach the point where we believe that God would do something about the situations that we're asking him for if he could, but he can't. Did you get that? God would if he could, but he can't. It's not a question there about God's power, but about whether he wants to, whether he has the ability to do what I'm asking him to do. His heart is towards me. His kindness is towards me. But I doubt whether he actually has the ability to do something about what I'm asking him to do. In Mark chapter 9 and verse 14, there's the story of a man whose son is demon possessed and he needs deliverance, and he's been to the disciples and they could do nothing about it. And how he comes in desperation to Jesus, recognizing the fact that those that are closest to Jesus have not been able to help him and to pray out this demon. And he has this question that he asks Jesus now. Your disciples didn't do it. They couldn't do it. Are you any better at it? That's really the subtext. And he has no problem in believing in the kindness of God towards him and Jesus's willingness to do it. He questions whether Jesus actually is capable of doing anything about changing the circumstances that he finds himself in. And in Mark 9 and verse 14, this is what he says to Jesus. If you can do anything, will you have compassion on us and help us? Notice that the condition is, I doubt whether you can. Your disciples couldn't. But if you can do something about this, then will you take pity on us? Will you have compassion? And will you help us? His problem here isn't unbelief, but it is a nagging doubt that God can actually remedy the situation. God can actually remedy the situation. So McGrath says that's the first thing. We can get to the place where we believe God would do something about the situation if he could, but we doubt whether he can. And the second reason that he gives to us is this. We reach the point where we say, God could if he would, but he won't. See, it's different. The first thing says, God would if he could, but he can't. The second reason is, God could if he would, but he won't. It's a different story altogether. Now we're not talking about his ability or his power to do something about this. We're now talking about his willingness or his compassion to do what I've asked him to do, especially when those things are very personal to me. If I've lost my job and I'm unemployed and I can't find any work, or all around me, and you as a congregation know this only too well, many people have lost the battle for life around either cancer or COVID or related things, and it's all been compressed into this period. And we confess that God's heart is towards us, but there's this nagging suspicion down the line that actually God can't do anything to remedy the political situation in our country, COVID, healing, unemployment, whatever it may be. Yes, his heart is there for us, but can he actually do it? Can he actually do it? Because he could if he would, but he won't. Gets a bit tongue-tied, isn't it? He could if he would, or he could. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 2 gives the story of a leper who approaches Jesus for healing. Now, understand the circumstances. They were outcasts. They were living on the fringes of society. There was no known cure for being able to fix him. When he comes to Jesus, he's desperate. And in Matthew 8 and verse 2, this leper approaches Jesus for healing. He's got no problem believing in God's ability or his capability to heal. It's strange. Nowhere else can he go for healing. He comes to Jesus because innately he believes that God has got the capacity, he's got the ability. The thing that he is not 100% sure of is, would Jesus do it? Would he stretch out his hand and will he heal him? He questions whether actually Jesus will do anything about it. And this is what the word says. This leper says to Jesus, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Remember the man whose son was demon possessed? He said, Lord, if you can do anything, have compassion and help us. The leper says, Lord, if you are willing, you can. If you are willing, you can. Again, it's not unbelief, folk, but it is often born out of tiredness or disappointment or regularly not seeing our prayers answered, where doubt sets in about why I'm being ignored or why God doesn't come through. Very real circumstances, very real reasons, but nonetheless, fertile ground for doubt to begin to settle in. You know, it doesn't help when I then have people around about me, well-meaning brothers and sisters in the Lord, who say, just pray about it, hold in, we'll get through this tough situation. God is going to do it. When it's personal and I'm tired and I'm disappointed and there seems to be no absolute tangible change in sight, the ground is set for me to begin to just question, is God able to? And if he's able to, is he willing to? It's very easy for me to understand the emotional response to constant disappointment and constant confusion and constant rejection. Shelley and I have walked with Arnold and Valmay for a while, and we know something of the struggle that they've gone through and the hours they've put into trying to secure a place for Impact Family Church to gather as a community, as a building. And it's got hard because either it's been so expensive or it's been not the right thing, or just when you think there's a breakthrough, some other brakes are put on. And then it gets harder because all the other churches are going back into buildings and things like that, and you still online only. And the longer it takes and the more disappointments there are and the greater the level there is, not for unbelief, but maybe just a measure of doubt. Is it ever going to change? Is God going to ever do anything about this? Beyond where Arnold and Valmay are going, for Shelley and I, we're constantly and currently overwhelmed by an ever-growing list of people that she and I are praying for, who are seriously ill and who are struggling to get better. Our prayer list every single day for people who are seriously ill, it seems to be growing and growing and growing. And we're desperately trusting God for those healings. And yet the reports that we're getting from some people is there's maybe a measure, but then others are going backwards and they're just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. See, our default is to then ask this question: have I done something that God won't answer me? Or does God really care? Because if he did, then my expectation is that he would do things very differently and the outcome would be very different. And we kind of think in those two opposite terms. Either I've done something and God then says, well, until you change this, I'm not going to change anything for you. Or we begin to feel like, will God ever get to the stage where he actually does something about it? And we begin to doubt, or our confidence begins to seep out. And we tend to think only in these two categories. I think that there's a third category. There's a third way. There's a different option that we need to consider this morning as we deal with these very real questions that some of us might be asking and going through as an impact family today. And the third option for me that gets away from these two opposing issues, I think, is suggested in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. Now, remember, James said, don't be double-minded, don't doubt, be fully focused. And that commends you in terms of how God is going to deal with you. And you can be bold in these things because there's no place for doubt. But how do we get there when our experience and our emotions are such that we're asking very valid questions? Well, if we allow ourselves just an ability to step away from an either-or situation and consider that there could be another way, then Romans 8:28 gives us that answer. And you know that verse very, very clearly. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may abound unto every good work. I quoted the wrong verse there. That's another verse I wanted to say. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 10. But Romans 8:28 says, in all things, God is working for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. It's a wonderful verse if we just grasp that this morning. In all things, we know that God is working for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. What was Paul saying to the Romans? He's saying God's priority is not this either or thing. Either I've done something wrong or he's not going to answer me anyway because he just doesn't want to. God's priority is journeying with me through life and seeing me grow even in the midst of the most horrific experiences. I hope you heard that this morning. Here's this third alternative. God's priority is journeying with me in what I'm going through and seeing me grow even in the midst of the most horrific experiences. And so whether I see grounds for doubt because, well, maybe I've done something and he's punishing me, or maybe he's just not capable of doing this, or maybe his heart isn't towards me, it's not the place that we come to this morning. Romans 8:28 is a very different perspective for me. You know, mathematically, we're told that the shortest point or the shortest route between 2 points is a straight line. But theologically, that doesn't add up. Theologically, the shortest point between 2 points, or the shortest route between 2 points, is not a straight line. Let me explain. Many, many years ago, when I was in matric, I, having spent some time as an athlete in my school and running 100 and 200 meter sprints, volunteered because it was my matric year and we were finishing, and the whole design of our athletics day was done differently. And the 4 matric classes were then set against each other in a number of different routines. And so I volunteered to run the 400 meters on behalf of my class against the other matric classes. Now, remember, I was used to running only 100 meters or 200 meters at a push, but 100 meters was my main event. And 100 meters really was the short sprint. It was the shortest distance between the start point and the finish line as a sprinter. It was quick. You were done. You ran the flat 100 meters and it was over. Now I volunteered because I was a sprinter. I volunteered for a race that was 4 times that distance. It went right the way around the fields, right the way around, 4 times the distance that I was used to running at a flat out rate. And because I was used to running 100 meters, the shortest distance, guess what? I lined up at the beginning of the 400 meters and ran a 400 meter race at the same pace that I would have run a 100 meter race. And you can imagine what happened. By the time I hit the last bend and I'd run 300 meters and I still had that 100 meter distance to run that I normally would have run, I was out of breath. I really was fatigued. And needless to say, I didn't win the race. I came in the places, but nothing like I would have done had it been just the normal race that I ran, because I had accustomed the way that I trained and that I ran to a 100 meter sprint, which was the shortest distance between 2 points. I hadn't allowed for, when I lined up for that 400 meters, a different tactic to be able to run 4 times that distance. The 100 meters was great for me because it was over quickly, and I received the same reward for the people that ran those longer distances as well. I was made to run 100 meters. What that really taught me is that when we fail to grasp that we need to look to Jesus for answers for the long journey, and we see Jesus as being the solution only for short bursts of answer, or we look to him like a 100-meter sprinter, life and requests for answers are those shortest distance between 2 points. When I only see him in that light, then I'm going to come to the place where I will see him as being neither unable or willing to be able to answer me. Jesus then, if I'm used to him giving me quick answers, or I only rely on him for quick answers or quick solutions, and I don't recognize that Romans 8:28 says he's with me, walking through my life with me, journeying with me, and there are checks and balances, and there are detours, and there are 400-meter type adjustments that need to be made, not just always the 100 meters. If I only expect him to answer me in a 100-meter capacity and not a 400-meter, and I don't make allowance for that, then when he doesn't do it the way I want him to, or he doesn't answer in the way that I expect him to, I get doubtful and I become disillusioned. And his delays then, as so often you hear from the pulpit, are interpreted on my side as being his denials. Well, because he hasn't answered and it's taking so long, that means he either doesn't care or he's not going to. That's where we get to. So the solution for me is how we understand his answers and the time that it takes for them to be revealed. That's most important. How we understand his answers and giving him the latitude for the time to take to be revealed. You know, folk, one of the most challenging scriptures for me is in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 39. It's the great faith chapter, and lots of great things have taken place, and people have done the most stupendous things for the kingdom of God. But in verse 39, having spoken about people who were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection, some facing jeers and flogging, while others were chained and put in prison. Some were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and ill-treated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. And the subtext is all because of the glory of God. But then verse 39 says, these people were all commended for their faith, and now listen to this. Yet none of them received what had been promised. Why? Because God had planned something better for us who are alive, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. It just blows my mind that these people did things on a far greater scale in terms of commending the witness of their lives to God and his glory, and showing the world that there was a pattern of life aligned with the goodness and the glory of God at a level that I can't even begin to appreciate or come close to. And yet they died never seeing the things that they were trusting God for, believing God for, praying for. They died never seeing those become a reality. That seems to be so unfair in so many ways. Just seems to be so wrong. But the reason that happened is because when God, who is God, has his way, both in terms of time and manner of asking, then that passage gives us an answer. Why did they not see what they'd been trusting God for? Why did they die without ever seeing the things that they believed for materializing? Well, says Hebrews, God had planned something better for you and for me as successive generations, so that only together with us who are alive today, exercising our faith, and those generations that are still to come, only together with us would they be made perfect. In other words, God was saying, it's your faith that's important and your relationship with me, not what I give you, what I do for you, because it's about the relationship and you trusting me as God, not only because I give you things. And I want to delay these things, not because I'm mean-hearted or I can't, or because I don't have compassion on you, but I have a greater purpose in mind, and it's going to include successive generations. If I had to give you everything that you're asking for right now, then how would those successive generations learn from you, trust me, and have everyone's faith made perfect? Talk about delay or not comprehending. These people satisfied themselves with the fact that following after God was all about trusting him, not what they could get out of the deal. So the fact that they died without seeing or receiving was not defeat for them, because God's plan and purpose was a far greater thing than merely how they felt about him or what he did or how it affected them. That's the important thing. What was at issue here wasn't how they felt about him, how they interpreted his delays or his denials. What was at stake here for those early Christians who just gave their lives in such a public way for his glory, what was so important for them was about the relationship with him and who he was, and that he was worth trusting, whether they saw answers to prayer or not. It was about him and trusting him to know what he was doing. That really challenges me. See, I may want to act in the shortest possible time and space, and I may want God to act in the shortest possible time and space, because that makes it best for me. I want these things to happen now. If I pray for healing, it must happen now. If I want God to deliver, it must deliver now. If I want answers to these, that, and the next thing, he must deliver now, because I live in this compressed time. It must happen now. We need to deliver. Yet my utmost trust in him today causes me to acknowledge and to accept that he will allow by his wisdom what he could so very easily deal with in his power. See, it's not about whether I get my way or not. My devotion to him shouldn't be about whether I can trust that he is able to deliver or that he is willing to deliver. It should never be about that. It should be about, God, you are who you are. And today I align myself with you, whether I can wrap my head around all these things, whether I'm disappointed, whether there's delays, or whether there seems to be denials of the very things that I'm asking for. Because it's not about me, God. It's about you, and it's about me living my life aligned with you for your glory. So as I end today, you have been refined. You have been going through all sorts of different stretchings and testings and so forth. And some of you today may be listening to me and saying, my current circumstances, Keith, are causing me to doubt his ability or his willingness and his kindness to me. But maybe I need to take a step back this morning and just recognize again the truth of Romans 8:28. It's not about whether he is willing or whether he is able to do something about what I've asked him for. Actually, Romans 8:28 says, in every single thing that's happening in my life, God is doing something that makes me more like him, that draws me closer to him. And it's always got this as the purpose. It's for my good, because I'm called according to his purposes. My definition of what's good for me may be very different to what God says. But according to that verse, in all things, God is working for my good. Now, that may be cold comfort for many of you, because your circumstances won't change tomorrow. The situations that you're facing are really stringent, and I'm not making light of that. But I am calling us as a church this morning to move from a place where we are maybe doubtful to a place of recommitment to faith and trust in the God who says, in all things, I am working out for your good the things that I have in my heart for you, because I'm both able and willing to address them. Don't run this as a 100-meter sprinter. Run it as a 400-meter. Give him the time and the latitude to perfect that which he is doing in you and for your lifetime, so that he gets the glory, because that's what our lives are oriented towards. God bless you, Impact. It's been lovely just sharing with you. I hope you've heard something in my own heart this morning. And may those of you who are really reaching out to God for some answers, may you see those answers from his perspective materializing in your life in the next little while. God bless you. and have a wonderful week. And we're looking forward to seeing you a little later in the year when we gather together in what God has finally brought to bear upon us as a building and as a gathering place. God bless you.